Hello everyone, let's do another chess lesson. Today we're going to be talking about surviving the opening. There are two types of players in chess. Those that love memorizing lines and learning tricks in the opening, and those of us who just want to make it to the middle game. I'm in the second category, and I believe that you don't need to do all this memorization in order to start getting really good at chess. However, we don't want to be falling for tricks, and we don't want to be setting ourselves up for failure by putting ourselves in worse positions. So this video is going to be all about avoiding tricks and getting yourself a good position going into the middle game. Let's start by recognizing the ideal setup. So the ideal setup starts with us getting control of the center, and that usually occurs with our pawns. We also want to get our minor pieces out. So that means both of our bishops and both of our knights. We want to get our king to safety by tucking him away to one side of the board, usually through castling. We want to make sure our rooks are connected and they see each other. And usually we want to create a little breathing room for our king. This avoids back rank checkmate and other problems like that. So this is the ideal position. But how are we going to get there, because our opponent's not going to just move their knight back and forth? To accomplish our goal, we're going to follow one simple rule. One piece, one move. All that means is we're going to avoid moving any piece more than once to gain time and land ourselves a good position out of the opening. So let's get started by playing a very common opening move, playing our pawn to the center of the board. You can play the d5 pawn or maybe another pawn to the center of the board. This is a great start. If our opponent does the same, now we can start developing our minor pieces. A great one in this position would be to bring our knight out attacking this pawn. And what I want us to notice is we can just develop each piece, but we need to be thinking about what square we're going to develop them to. We're only moving each piece one time, so we got to make it count. If we move our knight to h3 instead, we're limiting the amount of squares it sees. So we're not maximizing the value of the knight, so an active square is better. And that's going to apply for every single piece. For example, with the bishop, we could play to e2 and now we're ready to castle, but it's just not quite as active. And you're gonna find more success if you play your pieces to active squares. In this case, such as c4 with the bishop. Another thing to think about is the move order. If we play pawn to d3, which is a common move in the opening, in this position, it's not as good because now we're blocking in our bishop. Now, if we want to develop the bishop, we're either going to have to develop it to this less active e2 square, or we're going to have to push a different pawn to try to get it out. So I want us always to be thinking about how we can make active moves and how we can coordinate our pieces well. So in this position, now it's really good to play d3. We could also get our knight out because we're opening this square for the bishop and we already got our light square bishop out. So as we've discussed, an active move is always good in the opening. We want to put our pieces on active squares. Another thing we can do is we can try to make it difficult for our opponent to develop their pieces. So earlier we said we might want to create a little space for our king once it's castled. We could do that now, for example, because our opponent had just played d6, probably trying to get their bishop out to g4. Well, now they can't do that. And finally, another thing we can think about in the opening is taking advantage of our opponent's moves by winning time. So you might not know this theme, but one of the common things we might try to do as white here is take even more space with our pawns by getting both pawns in the center, like we saw in our ideal setup for an opening. So one way we could do that is by first winning time by kicking out the knight and gaining control of this d4 square. When the knight moves really badly to the edge of the board, we can now push and take full control of the center. And this is a very dominant and amazing opening. So I know this is a lot to think about, but I promise you'll get better with time. And if you just focus on one piece, one move, putting your pieces on active squares, you should be fine. Okay, I didn't sound very confident there. I am confident in you. You've got this. You're going to get out of the opening. You're going to go on to crush your games. Now, I'm just going to go over a couple of tricks, or a couple of tips to avoid being tricked in the opening. If your opponent plays something that looks really odd to you, like they give up a pawn for free and they do it very confidently, my advice is that's probably a line that they have studied. If you don't know what to do after you take here, I think even this is a gambit that people play, you just might not want to go for it. You might want to live to fight another day and try to beat them in the middle game. And just play normally. Just develop your pieces like you were going to. Don't fall into these obscure lines that you don't know. However, if you're really confident that your opponent just blundered a piece or something, take it. Don't be scared. And if it's more than a pawn, like it's a minor piece that they blundered, take it, usually. The other tip I have is if we see our opponent bring out their queen early, usually they're probably up to something. And it might be Scholar's Mate. This is a common thing. We saw it at the beginning of this video. We got mated like this. It's nothing to be scared of. In fact, if we play correctly, they're setting themselves up to be in a worse position. We're going to just do the principles that we've already learned. How can we develop pieces to good squares and win time, and then just also not hangmate in this case? So one move we could do that is playing g6, kicking out the queen. The queen goes there. Don't forget that the danger isn't over. But now we can play just the simple knight to f6, developing our knight, putting it on a great square. And now we've developed two minor pieces. We're ready to put our bishop on a diagonal like this, or even here maybe. And we're in great shape. So that's all I have for you today. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you learned something. Thank you so much.